All right, so we're up to part 2, and I'm going to talk about supply risk and capacity issues, some economic considerations, and why water losses are important, or why I think they're important. So as we mentioned in the first presentation, having a safe and adequate supply of drinking water is fundamental to public health. And obviously there are two main aspects to this: water quality and quantity, having sufficient water. Now, there's been a lot of focus on water quality with the Havelock North incident and with the setting up of a regulator in New Zealand. But anyway, what I'm talking about today is to do with quantity. So with climate change, climate variations and unusual water patterns, these are impacting our water supplies. Or how are they impacting our water supplies? So you recall this little diagram from the first part. We have a source of water, we get the raw water to the treatment plant, and then the treated water gets into the network as treated water. So we have a production line. And so any break or capacity issue in the production line will cause supply issues. So it might be back here, it might be in the raw water main, it might be at the treatment plant, it might be in a transmission main, it might be in a local. Any break in the line can cause supply issues. So I'm going to talk about, so there are supply risks and there are capacity issues. So I'm going to talk for a bit about risks to sources. Now we all know this is a common one. Under average rainfall causing low levels in lakes, rivers, storage dams and aquifers. So we get that around New Zealand quite a lot. We've had a fantastic summer, if you could call it a fantastic summer, but it hasn't rained in Auckland many days for about the last 3 or 4 months. So we're certainly getting it here in Auckland, and it happens around New Zealand, causing low levels. Algae and stored water. You can get algae turn up in a storage reservoir that's used for water supply, and all of a sudden it needs extra treatment or it's not treatable, so that can be an issue. River and dam levels are so low, water intakes are left high and dry. That's nearly happened to a town in New Zealand probably around 10 years ago, but I recall it happening. And what a disaster that would be if you can't get the water out of the river into your water treatment plant. Storms affecting raw water quality in streams and storage dams. There can be inundation with silt-laden water. A treatment plant can't treat brown water, when it's that bad. So these things can happen. Contamination incident with a bore like we had at Havelock North, or there's a spill into a river, sabotage. There's that scenario where a tanker, tips off the state highway down in the Waikato somewhere and goes into the Waikato River. And, Hamilton, Auckland, people have to turn their water off for 24 hours, let all the contaminated water get past the treatment plant. So, these things can happen. They're not, they can definitely happen. And storms can cause damage to storage dams. Recall a few years ago, Watercare had that huge slump into one of the Ardmore dams, and the water just all turned yellow with all the clay particles. So these things happen. And also we have got sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. Maybe not so much a big deal in New Zealand, but certainly in the Pacific Islands and other countries. So look at the flooding we can get in New Zealand. So these are some more components of our production line. The water treatment plant, storm or earthquakes. Remember, we get a lot of earthquakes in New Zealand. We get them quite regularly, and that's a risk. Can take out power supplies, can take out equipment, flooding, loss of power supplies, trunk mains, storm or earthquake, damaged slips, etc. So, you hear one of these in New Zealand every now and again too. A major slip's taken out the water main, and so it can easily take days and days to reinstate that pipeline because the ground's gone where it was, and we have got polyethylene pipes which are very useful, but you've still got to somehow support them. And important pumping stations, etc. Important reservoirs. Earthquake might cause structural damage, or water mains are broken down in the network and half the water's gone, so by the time you turn the water off after the earthquake, you're down at 30% before you even start to fix the problems. So you've got a depletion of emergency storage. So many of those above risks could be considered short term. We're talking weeks or months, days, weeks or months. And hence the main issue is maintaining supply during the event and while repairs are being made until supply is reinstated. So any available storage becomes critical, and you don't want to run out of water or you're into tankers, etc. So I've got a couple of scenarios here just to, which I think you'll find pretty interesting. So this is some data from a town in New Zealand. And so basically September, October, November, this is each month for 12 months. And basically this brown through here is billed metered consumption. So this is actually all non-residential properties are metered. The meters are read about every quarter. So we've got good data to know what's happening with that consumption throughout the year, and it's pretty steady like that. The actual water use for the whole town does this. This is average for the month, and you can see it's quite high seasonal variation. You know, it increases, almost doubles from there to there. And basically, in this particular town, the water losses, the assessed level of water losses, because this is assessed as well, unmetered residential, but you can see it's got a reasonable sort of level of water loss, if you like. Basically, this line here is with an infrastructure leakage index of 2.5. So basically, it's probably just over 3 or something. And basically, if they reduce it to 2.5, it would be that line there. So you'd gain. And it's fairly fair to draw losses consistent throughout a 12-month period because it's made up of thousands of little leaks. It doesn't generally change that rapidly. So what am I saying here? I'm saying, assuming this town had, say, 12,000 cubic metres of reservoir storage, which is about an average day. See, that's 10,000, 15,000. So the average daily water use is around 12,000. And quite often towns have a day, 24-hour storage. Well, with the current level of losses, in January, you've actually only got 0.65 of a day. Average daily use, you've got just over a day, just over 24 hours. And in August, when you've got low water use, you've actually got 1.4 days. So you've got more than a day, right? Now, if they reduce the losses down to here, basically those figures improve to 0.69, 1.14, 1.58. So the difference in hours, you can have an extra hour in January. It doesn't sound much, but you've got an extra hour. For average daily water use, so say in November and around this time of year, you'd have an extra 3 hours of storage, and in August you'd have 5 hours. So over here you've got 5 hours of storage. Now, why is that important? Because it might be you don't know what's going to happen, but if you get a slip, like actually Taupo had a bad slip, didn't they? It went down into the lake, and it took a long time to, it wasn't a 5-minute job to restore supply. So, but if you've got a broken main, it typically might take 5 hours to fix. 1 hour out of 5 hours is significant, it's another hour. And similarly, these other numbers. So basically, even reducing a moderate level of losses to a better level of losses can have an impact and an incident. So that's what I'm trying to say. Here's another town which has got a high level of losses. There probably aren't many of these, but this is some data that I've got from a town. And so basically there's a high level of losses, and I made a note that there was probably typical seasonal variation, although if you reduce the losses it'd probably be more than what it looks. But basically, once again, we have billed unmetered consumption, we've got assessed residential water use, and we've got high losses in here. So if they reduce it down to this level of 2.5, infrastructure leakage index of 2.5, for January, the average day, and for May, you'd have another extra 8 hours, 11 hours, 16 hours. And the numbers are a lot bigger because you've reduced the losses by a lot. So if you have an incident, it takes out part of that production chain that is measured in sort of days or hours or days, this can be significant. So that's one reason I think water losses are important. What's happening with climate change? Well, I think we have had significant periods of hot weather resulting in record-breaking water use and demand, and we've had that in Auckland, Northland, certainly this summer. And actually, also with COVID-19, water demand profiles are changed as people's travel and holiday arrangements are altered. So you've got a whole lot more people holidaying in New Zealand, I think, and so things have changed. Now I've got a real-life example here, because I was up north, and this article turned up in the paper. It was a good little article. Far North urged to conserve water. So there's a call to conserve water. So as a network operator, we can reduce water losses, but obviously there's the whole consumption part, water use on property, where you go out and you ask customers to reduce their water use. So that's what that's about. Here we go. Unprecedented demand is breaking records. And that was partly because the hot weather and partly probably because of COVID. So there were unprecedented demand up north in this particular town. Level 2 restrictions are in place, so they've brought in some restrictions for the customers. Increasing supply. The treatment plant is running 24 hours a day. Production has been ramped up from 3,200 to 3,375 metres cubed a day. That's what it says in here. He deserves the medal, doesn't he, the water treatment plant operator? He's cranked up production, maintained water quality, but got more water. Water carriers have been redirected. So those who need their tanks filled up out in the country, the carriers are going to have to go somewhere else to fill up. So here's a real life example of what can happen. We're in unprecedented times. These things can happen. Now I want to talk about supply capacity constraints. So we can have resource consent approved, a water take limit. So water takes have a consent take limit, and that might be being approached. That's a constraint. Capacity of the source intake and pumps. Capacity of the water treatment plant. Often this is designed to match this, but not always. Often these are all designed together, but possibly not. This might be reducing, in fact. Capacity of pumps and trunk mains. Capacity of the reservoir tanks. Like I said, there's generally a 24-hour storage requirement. Some places have more, some places probably have a bit less. And there's capacity of the local network, and this is where the losses are that I'm talking about mainly, the real losses happening in this local network. So let's go back to the graph we saw before. These bar graphs were average for the month, average for September, average for October, average for November, etc. This was the peak day in the month, so that's the peak day in January, and this is the capacity of the water treatment plant. So you're getting pretty close. Now there's a lot of scope to go out and tell people to stop leaving their hoses on 24 hours a day and then stop sprinkling their lawns, etc. So you could go and ask people to conserve water to get it down from here, but you haven't got a lot of headroom there, have you? And so reducing water losses, even this bit there, will basically double that. It gives you a bit more headroom, so that's another benefit of reducing losses. Looking at a longer time frame, this is out basically from forecast from now, 30 years, from 2020 to 2050. This is a forecast of annual water use based on population projections, projected water use, etc. And it's been done in three components: non-revenue water, which is mostly losses; non-residential, which is the metered water use; and unmetered domestic. And these have all been forecast separately and added together to give us an annual water use going out the next 30 years. And that's the same data, but now it's expressed in metres cubed per day. And this red line is a peak daily demand with a peaking factor of 1.5. So we're saying the average water use on the peak day in this system is about 1.5. I think it's fairly general, a fairly common type factor. But anyway, it's 1.5. This is based on their data. So here's a forecast peak day. And we've got a few horizontal lines on this graph. Here's the current, first of all, so that's the 1.5, and this allows for about a 5% variation. This plus 5% for possible variance. So that's a bit of a probability that it could easily get up to here without too much happening. So basically we've got this horizontal green line here is the current storage capacity. So they're reaching 24 hours. Basically, no, they're not reaching 24. The average is down here. But on a peak day in summer, so in January, on a peak day, they won't have 24 hours. In fact, pretty much now. They're just on 24 hours. So if anything happens to their supply in summer on a peak day, they've got 24 hours emergency storage, and they've got to start getting more water or they're in trouble. Now basically, so they're going to build some more storage reservoirs. I don't know they are, so that's all good. This line here is consented water take. So basically, When this demand gets up to here, they've got a problem because their peak day, they could easily reach their consented water take. So that's an issue for this particular council. So basically, with the reduction in demand, including water losses, you can easily defer expenditure or this issue, for maybe 5 years. And this could be and the capacity of the water treatment plant could be through here too, and that might defer. If the red line's hitting that, then you might be able to defer that 5 years or whatever as well. And in fact, if you're aggressive reducing water losses, you can extend it. This depends how aggressive you are reducing water losses. This is another hypothetical situation which I've thought about, the cumulative effect on storage volumes. So let's say we've got a town where the storage volume just fluctuates like so, say 65 to 95%. So that's with the current level of losses, that's what it does. Now with prolonged under average rainfall, say levels fall 10% each year. So the storage is going to be doing this. So you're coming down here. So after 3 years, the cumulative effect of this is significant. And so you could be getting down here to quite low levels, and then you've got demand restrictions and you're starting to produce more water. So if storage levels, so this graph is showing this scenario, so that's with the current level of losses. If losses were 5%, so I'm using percentage now, so I'm saying this now is 5% of that, so I'm breaking my own rules, but for this purpose of this scenario, that's a cumulative because it's just like going out to customers to save water. If they're saving water, it's cumulative and it's improving the storage levels, right? Similarly with real losses, it's a part of demand. Whether you're saving water from here or saving water for there, it's hitting dam levels. And so if real losses were 10% less than current levels, you wouldn't have a problem. So reducing water losses is one way of reducing overall demand, and it depends. Often dams fill and overflow, so you don't actually get to 3 years. I looked up some Sydney data, and their dams can store 6.5 years or something of daily water use in Sydney, even if it doesn't rain. The storage volume in Sydney is absolutely incredible, and they don't overflow, for 10, 15, 20 years. But a lot of New Zealand dams, we have high rainfall, so it'll overflow every 2 or 3 years. But we're waiting for that to happen in Auckland, aren't we? But it probably will happen. So the economic considerations. So decision for the water supplier when you have a supply issue. Do we reduce demand or do we increase supply or do we do both? And we may do both. There's no problem with doing both. But it's all too common that people love to build things. They'll say, "Oh, we're running out of water. Let's build a new big shiny treatment plant. CapEx is in. Borrow the money, spend." But the other way is that, can you reduce demand? This is more certain, there's certainty. You get it designed, you go through construction, it's all going to happen. People get nervous about reducing demand, and in terms of reducing water losses, if you go through the process, I'm sure you'll win, but it takes 5 years. I'll come to that soon. It's not an overnight thing, and often people leave it too late to do. But we should be thinking long term. This was an article and stuff, within the last 6 months. Revealed who pays the highest rates in New Zealand. Well, I wasn't too worried about what Phil Goff had to say, but look what it says down here. Central Otago District Mayor Tim Carrigan said that while low rates look good, he said water meters in the region had made a huge difference to the cost of infrastructure, which was one reason rates had been kept low. So I know exactly what happened down there because they used to have unmetered water use, and in here, customers were using 1,000 litres per property per day or more than that. Now they've put in water meters, that's probably down to, even if it's down to 700, that's a 30% reduction. They will have had a huge reduction in this, so all of a sudden, they don't have to upgrade the water treatment plant. Everything's okay because they've got all the spare capacity because they've reduced here. Well, I'm talking about reducing these as well, but obviously putting in water meters, very effective in reducing demand. Now we talk about the cost of water, and those that are here today, I showed them a graph. I said it was business as usual for an economic intervention level for reducing water losses. But just think about this for a minute. The variable cost of producing treated water in New Zealand might be around 10 cents a cubic metre. We're sort of talking power and chemicals. Might only be 5 cents, 5 to 10 cents, but can be very low. So this is the variable cost. So you've still got the operator there, you've still got all the infrastructure, you've still got to pay the rates, you've got all the fixed costs, but the variable cost is around 10 cents a cubic metre. So I guess you could say, if you're going to reduce this, all you're saving is 10 cents a cubic metre. It's pretty hard to economically justify, it on that basis. But the marginal cost of providing additional treated water will be significantly more. So if you get to the point where you've got to build a new treatment plant, or you need a new resource consent, or you need a new trunk water main, I haven't got any numbers, but it's going to be a whole lot more than 10 cents a cubic metre. This is more a common scenario. If water is in short supply, water may need to be tankered in at a cost of around, say, $200 for 10 cubic metre, $20 a cubic metre, 2,000-fold increase on that. So as soon as you start tankering water, you're paying 2,000 times more for the water. And this isn't uncommon. This happens quite a lot. If you watch the papers, town runs, the reservoir's running low. And it happened when I was at Waitakere. We had to do it a few times, because if you can't find a leak and the reservoir's falling, you haven't got much choice. You've got to take the water in. And you're talking, and this is if water's available probably within half an hour. This is for about an hour round trip. So this is assuming the truck can go from the reservoir that you want filled up, go and get water half an hour, treated water, drinkable water, potable water, fill up there, come back to the reservoir, empty. Well, the charge-out rate for truck's about $165. I rang and asked the guy. So basically, this is realistic. That's 2,000-fold increase. The next step is bottled water at, say, $1. That's a 10,000-fold increase. So then you're distributing bottled water, and then the toilets, you've got all sorts of issues then. You might have to tanker in untreated water to maintain basic public health, to flush the toilet. We don't often get to these desperate measures, but it could happen. And then we go about constructing temporary supplies to meet demand. And that takes time, and it's costly, because you want it done by tomorrow. So when you look at the cost of water in New Zealand is pretty cheap. But if you run short of water, it's not going to be cheap. It's going to cost you a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars. Probably more, hundreds of thousands possibly. So what are the main benefits of managing real losses to low levels? So in the short term, emergency storage will last longer in a supply incident. There are significant costs to manage a major water outage and to import water. Well, significant costs to manage a major water outage and to import water will be minimised or even avoided. So, even though you get an extra 2, 3, 4 hours, if you're running out of water, I've been there. If you're running out of water, it's not nice, and you have to take measures. And if you've got a tank of water in, it's going to cost you. And that's if you've got that option. I mean, that's an easy option, really. It might not be that simple. The measures to put in place to manage water losses provide significant other operational benefits with associated cost savings. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow. If you're monitoring the network in quite significant detail with zones, etc., you get a whole lot more information, and there are other benefits. Here's a burst pipe, which left 10,000 people without water in the Kalani, has been fixed. So look at that. Look at these are the incidents that you can have. And they will happen. It's just a matter of where and when. But look, Wellington's had a bad run. Haven't they? Yeah. So in the medium term, the cumulative effect of reduced losses can avoid low dam levels. That was that I showed you after 3 years. It could be quite a significant difference. Or to maintain aquifers for bores, like surface storage is one. There's underground storage as well, which may avoid the cost of managing an ongoing water shortage. And reduced losses will provide additional headroom for those peak days when water demand is excessive. In the longer term, reducing water losses creates spare capacity in the water supply system production chain, which can then be used to accommodate growth. And significant items of capital expenditure can be deferred as overall water use is reduced and the impacts of growth are mitigated. So in general, reducing water losses results in a lower water take at the source, providing environmental benefits, high residual stream flows, aquifer recharge, etc. And reduced water losses means a lower overall carbon footprint, less pumping, less treatment, so it's more sustainable. And I haven't talked about the environment much, but streams with not much water, high residual flows could be important. So the key messages: there is a production line for the delivery from source to tap. Any break in the production line will cause supply issues. When this happens, the level of real losses, I think, becomes very important. There are numerous supply risks associated with climate change, with earthquakes and asset failure, and having low water losses will help mitigate supply risk. Capacity issues can also impact the supply of water, capacity of the treatment plant. Reducing water losses has short, medium and long-term benefits, like we talked about, and there are environmental benefits. And if you run short of water, it's not going to be cheap. So that's the end of part 2. So, yeah, are there any questions about that? Does it make sense? Yeah, I guess some of these things I've only really thought about in the last couple of years, really, or they become evident. So anyway, any questions for that?
Most of the councils do not put it like this. We as a human take rainwater for granted and we push it out to the sea. What we like is a nice surface tarmac area rather than a lawn, because the rain is there, but we push that same water to the sea rather than recharging the aquifers. And the long term is, we can expect there's no water.
Mm. Well, there's certainly pressures coming on water supplies all around the world and in New Zealand, and there's competition for water. You know, you've got the dairy farms and cities vying for water on the Waikato River. You know, so it's a certainly important thing.